Welcome, everyone. Hope it's not snowing, sleeting, or freezing rain where you are. Just a quick welcome beyond that. I'm David Thornburgh. I'm President and CEO of the Committee of 70, Managing Director of Draw the Lines, and also had the pleasure of chairing the Redistricting Commission that did great work about a year and a half ago in the before times that probably talked to a lot of you in our long trips around the Commonwealth to listen to people talk about what they wanted out of the redistricting process. So we have an enormous crowd tonight. Last I heard, we had about 1,200 people signed up for this, and I expect they'll continue to come streaming in, which, by the way, is a sound antidote to those that say nobody really cares about this stuff. It's boring, it's process. So there are at least 1,200 nobodies out there that care about this. Let me tell you a little bit about what the agenda is for this evening. And Justin, if you could flip, there you go. First of all, we're just going to do a little dive into the legislative districts. We're not going to be talking about the congressional districts tonight. We're going to be talking about Draw the Lines, which I think many of you are already familiar with, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. We're going to particularly dig into the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, which is one of the bodies that is set up, the only body actually that is set up in Pennsylvania to draw the legislative maps. And we're going to talk a lot about how that's going to work and how you can become involved with that. Particularly, we're going to encourage you to consider taking some actions to make sure that that Legislative Reapportionment Commission is here's the voice of Pennsylvania citizens and maybe includes one of you. And we're going to conclude with an update from Kuniholm and Pat Beaty from Fair Districts and the League of Women Voters about the great work that they've been doing, and also an update on some what we continue to hope are some positive legislative developments. So before I get too much further into the details, though, I want to encourage you to do this. There is an opportunity, I said earlier, to include a Pennsylvania citizen, just like you, as the 5th member of the Legislative Reapportionment Commission that we're going to talk about later. And we have launched a website that you can, with a petition that you can sign to say that's what we ought to do. We ought to have a regular citizen be part of that commission. And by the way, maybe even you would like to step forward and raise your hand and say, that could be me. So the way I figure it, we had ballpark maybe of 750, 1,000 people on the line tonight. By the end of this evening, we should have at least 1,000 people signing that position. And then do the math, share it with 2 friends in the next day or 2, or as soon as you can. And pretty soon we could have 3,000 people signing that petition to step forward and say, we need to have citizens involved in this process. So with that, let me turn it over to Justin, who's going to help guide us through. Justin Villere, who is the Managing Director of Draw the Lines, who's going to help walk us through this tour of our state maps and how we can make sure that we get great maps out of the process this time around. Justin?
Thank you, David. And so just a very quick housekeeping note, we are going to be taking questions at the end. And so please feel free to use the Q&A in Zoom to put your question into the queue so that we can, hopefully, if we get time, discuss it towards the end of our conversation. So I'll be checking that every once in a while on the chat, but try to do the Q&A if you can. Do we have Logan Ford? I don't see him on the list here. So what we're going to do here is, before we actually get into the process of legislative redistricting, we thought it'd be instructive to kind of visualize what the process has produced in the previous iterations of this redistricting of legislative districts. So we're going to compare the maps that we've seen with also some maps that we've had from Draw the Lines mappers. So Logan Ford was going to join us. I don't see him on here, so I'm going to go without Logan. I hope that's all right. But Logan is a member of our Citizen Map Corps, and there's a really strong group of these elite mappers who have done this process themselves. And so they're going to be sprinkled throughout the presentation night. You'll hear from them providing some commentary in a way that we think is really neat, and they're going to be the faces and voices of citizen involvement for Draw the Lines for the next year. And so that said, you can kind of see, it's hard to see, on a small computer screen or a phone, just how intricate these districts look. These are the state Senate districts that were passed in 2012. So there's 50 of them. You can start to see that some of them kind of meander over county boundaries. They're not very compact. But then when you dive into the actual districts, on a much closer level, you can see that there are some pretty interesting shapes. So the interesting shapes not only represent, or might not necessarily represent a gerrymander, but they could really show how difficult it is for a senator or a state rep to just represent very disparate communities or scattered geographies. So some of them don't have any say over their maps. They're just walked into a room and told this is what your map is going to look like without any say. So you can see 7th District outside in Philly. It's kind of a strange combination of Montco with Northwestern Philly, University City, and West Philly. The 20th District is rather interesting. It's a safe Republican district surrounding a safe Democratic district. And then it winds over into Luzerne County. And it's interesting to note, Luzerne County is split into 4 different state Senate districts, which is certainly against best practices and what the Constitution would require. The other district up here is the 30th. This kind of catches Cumberland County instead of Franklin, like the rest of Franklin there. And so the other districts in this area are safe Republican as well. This one is safe R2. And so it kind of compels you to wonder, why is that district pulling that big appendage out there? And so, as David likes to say, lines are there for a reason. Every line is there for a reason. And so what our hope is that we can kind of understand a little bit more about what these lines are telling us and have a say in that process. But then you can compare that to a citizen mapper. Alex Yarkowski is a student at Allegheny College. He's a multiple-time DTL honoree. And this is the map he drew for our recent state Senate competition. And you can see that Alex did a noticeably better job on compact districts and limiting county splits. And as we're going to talk about later, that's a pretty important constitutional requirement for these districts. So props to Alex. If we move to the state house plan that was put in place in 2012, again, difficult to see 203 districts with a choppy map on a computer screen, but you can see, if you look closely, there are some pretty geographically challenged and geometrically challenged districts up here that if you drill down into localities, really create some questions as to why a district is drawn that way. So Erie, Logan pointed out that there's a section missing there, that there's no real clear reason why. It's not a particular community of interest. And so Logan, as an Erie native, was able to provide comment on that. Somebody also noted the 10th district here in Western PA. This is kind of near part of Lawrence and Beaver County, and then there's an appendage that sticks into Butler. But somebody thought that looked like maybe a toilet with the seat up. And that seat that's moving up towards Newcastle is actually not contiguous. And so you have to wonder why, what's the case there? Because there's a very small little piece, if you can see my cursor, that's not connected to the rest of the district. And then you move to Lehigh Valley, that's just kind of a mess over there. So again, a lot of these representatives didn't have much of a say in how these districts were drawn. And so they might be in favor of more transparency and having their constituents have a voice in this. You compare this to a citizen mapper. Mia Modell was a Temple student in Philly who drew one of our winning state house maps in our competition recently. And you can see she handled two challenging areas, Western PA near Allegheny County, and then the Lehigh Valley. She handled those in a way that is visually superior to what the mappers, the political pros did last time. So what you can then see is, as we look at not just the visualization of the maps, but also the metrics, this is something that's very important to draw the lines, is to really put to calculation, how do these maps shape out? And so I mentioned compactness and county splits. These are two things that are required among state legislative districts to try to maintain limiting county splits and maximizing compactness. And so these numbers here, if you look at the state Senate plan, the compactness score for that is 27%. To give you an idea, our mappers averaged about a 32 to 33% compactness score. A perfect circle would be 100%. A really good score is in the 40s, and that's what Alex achieved. You remember from his districts, they were relatively smooth without any crazy carve outs or jut outs. And so he nailed it in comparison to what the political pros did. County splits are something that you're supposed to limit. You don't want to have too many counties that are divided among districts, and Alex did better on that as well. Competitive elections, this is just simply, election results with producing results that are within about 10 points of each other, so that either party has a chance to win that race. And then population deviation is simply the difference between the largest and the smallest district in terms of total population. So kind of per objective standards, Alex knocked it out of the park. And it kind of just proves the point that a college student can do this much more effectively, or at least quantitatively so, more effectively than the politicians do. If majority minority representation is a value that you hold, we might, our mappers didn't quite do as well, but it's something that it's really instructive to dig into that data a little deeper, to kind of sniff out some of the packing and cracking that goes on among communities of color, and to investigate how much are communities of color really being dispersed to limit their political power. Excuse me. So that all said, I don't think we have Logan, so hopefully we'll get him on the next go around. But this is something David's pointed out too, and I'm going to toss it back to him for this next piece, is there's been some movement in how these maps have changed over the last couple decades.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. And I think as Justin, the last set of numbers that he put up there, and the visuals demonstrate, one of the things we've been saying about draw the lines, I know the Fair Districts folks have been saying this, that the citizens of Pennsylvania are ready, willing, and able to contribute to this process. They understand the maps. They can draw maps that meet the guidelines and that are more fair than the ones that have been produced in the past. And this is, I think, a particularly troubling observation about what's happened in the 5 cycles since 1971, where the LRC has been charged with drawing state maps, which is to say they're getting worse. Every year since 1982, 2002, and 2012, or 1992, sorry, they've gotten worse. And it doesn't really matter whether it's partisan bias favoring the Republicans or Democrats. It's the fact that they're headed in the wrong direction. And this also demonstrates, by the way, that the metrics are available so that any of us, given a particular map, can sort of put it through the grinder and come out with a pretty good sense of the story that map tells. In this case, partisan bias that seems pretty apparent. So that leads me, now that we've sort of taken a tour into the maps and the metrics, what difference does it make? And a lot of us on this call have been talking about gerrymandering for a number of years, and there are many evils, I think, that are associated with partisan gerrymandering. But as this graphic demonstrates, there was something about even the events of January 6th that remind us what some of those evils are. And that's simply that, you know, the process and the rules of the game that we have in place right now, particularly the way we draw maps, makes it too easy for elections to cater to the base of a particular party. You go through this paddle wheel of a primary that's largely determined by the base, and then more and more you have uncompetitive general elections, and that results in that contributes to a very divisive partisan rhetoric and an inability to govern, which I think is what really brings at least my organization to this issue to begin with. So there are consequences to this. This is not just a math game gone awry. There are real consequences to the quality of our politics and representation. So the good news is where this process has been weaponized in the past, where a few people with a lot of data and powerful software and powerful computers have been able to manipulate the maps, it's now been democratized. And Draw the Lines has demonstrated over the last several years, again, that thousands of Pennsylvanians are ready, willing, and able to step forward and contribute to this process. Draw the Lines PA is a civic education campaign that says, let's give the citizens of Pennsylvania the tools and the data to draw their own maps. And in doing that, again, demonstrate the demand for fair maps and for being included in the process. This is a project of the Committee of 70. It is nonpartisan, nonprofit, funded entirely by Pennsylvania foundations, all the folks that a lot of you know that are really pillars of our community. So there's no hint of outside money here. This is funded in Pennsylvania and made in Pennsylvania. And over the last several years, we've had 10,000 people step forward and get engaged in Draw the Lines. 6,000 of them have directly been involved in drawing maps, and they've produced in the various competitions we've had over 1,500 maps to date. And we have a current competition underway, deadline June 1st, and we'll see a whole nother crop of great maps. And as the picture demonstrates, the great news is that how many young people, Justin mentioned some of them, but high school students, college students who have stepped forward and said, basically, this is the democracy that I will inherit. These are the districts that we live in. These are the districts that we care about and the future that we care about. And we have an opportunity and responsibility to step forward and say, these are our districts, and we want to and can contribute to the way they look. So it's been a great success and is far from over. Justin, back to you.
If I can unmute myself, there we go. So Draw the Lines, when David and our colleague Chris Satullo started this, they had a story in mind of this woman. And so I want to bring forward another MapCorps member, Rachel Karp. Rachel, I saw you on, there you are, awesome.
Here, hello.
How are you?
Great, how are you?
Good, good. So Rachel, again, member of our Citizen MapCorps, and she's going to tell us about Amanda. Rachel is a theater maker, and the productions that she works on focus on public policy. And so you actually have a performance out right now, right? You guys have one scheduled in March, right? Is that right?
We've done it in different iterations. Yeah, none yet upcoming, but many plans in the works.
Awesome.
And it's
cool.
about gerrymandering, and it's called packing and cracking, which are two words that were said earlier. So
wonderful, right?
Right. Point, yeah.
Yeah, and you're a graduate of Carnegie Mellon, and so you were an honoree. Rachel was an honoree in 2019 with her partner Joseph. So yes, but I will turn it over to you. You did some research for Packing and Cracking and interviewed Amanda, and so
Yeah.
Tell us her fascinating story.
Sure. So you might have known Amanda's name. She's a little bit of a name in Pennsylvania redistricting, but yeah, I'll give a little overview of her story. So back in 2010, before that year's November elections, Amanda started looking at who was running for office, not just where she lived, but also in neighborhoods around her. And she realized that the neighborhoods that she was in and was near were split up in ways that really didn't make sense to her as someone who was living there. And that was true for legislative districts and also for congressional districts. And just for one example, though I know we're not really focusing on congressional districts, but every part of her county was in the same congressional district, except there was this like one tiny voting precinct that had been carved out and was in another district. And Amanda wanted to figure out why this had happened. It didn't make sense to her, but maybe there were some rules that required the maps to end up in this way. And to her, she thought the way to really figure this out was to try to draw maps herself. So to treat it kind of like a puzzle and follow the requirements and see if the maps needed to be how they were. And her method for drawing the maps was pretty low tech. She used like pencil and paper and Excel spreadsheets, but she made really good maps. And she realized that there were no reasons why the communities that she was part of needed to be split in the ways that they were. So she reached out to her legislators to try to get this fixed. And she testified at hearings, and the maps that were coming out of the General Assembly weren't getting better. And so then she read in the Pennsylvania Constitution that there's an appeal process for legislative districts where citizens can appeal directly to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court if they think that the maps are wrong or harming them. And so she did that. And she worked with the Public Interest Law Center, which is based in Philadelphia, and they challenged the maps, and Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed with them. And they won, and the maps, the state legislative maps, had to be redrawn. So it was a big win, and all because this one person decided she should draw some maps.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amanda's been involved with Draw the Lines, and she served on the commission in which David chaired, the Redistricting Reform Commission. And so she's going to be active in this process too. We'll talk a little bit more about her actual court challenge as we get into the process, but she's a great advocate for fair and transparent redistricting. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right. I'm going to throw it back to David now. There we go, for what we're doing.
Okay, so here's the part of the game plan, the play that we hope to run, that are running here in 2021. First of all, it's the foundation is, as Justin mentioned, the Citizen Map Corps, who is sort of our elite team of about 50 veteran and award-winning, prize-winning citizen mappers who have come through the Draw the Lines process, and you're going to hear some of their voices this evening. Just a wonderful group. We've been having monthly meetings talking about ways in which they can represent this effort to serve as the faces and the voices of reform and fair maps. I mentioned this earlier, but we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on publicizing the fact that an average citizen can be named to serve and even and to chair the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. And if you haven't filled out signed the petition yet, now's your chance. This is the second of 3 warnings before the end of the program, because that's a really important statement to make. It's one thing to write a letter to the editor or show up at an event, but it's another thing to step forward and say, we actually need to have an independent citizen at the table when the maps are drawn. Third thing is we intend, as this process unfolds, to stand up an actual mapping commission made up of Pennsylvania voters. Therefore, it is called the Pennsylvania Voters Map Commission, to demonstrate and to crystallize this sense that there's a lot of talent across the Commonwealth and a lot of people that care about this and are knowledgeable and spent way more time than you can imagine trying to figure out how Pennsylvania ought to be divided into districts. And so if we can stand up that commission and demonstrate that that people can do this job, we can sort of create the sense of what citizen-driven success can look like. And finally, with all these maps swarming around, there will be plenty available to provide to the LRC and to the General Assembly as the actual process unfolds. Again, to demonstrate again and again that citizens deserve a voice, citizens can help do this job, and they literally can put the digital tools in their own hand and produce good maps.
So knowing what we're going to do, we kind of have to understand what the process is and how we can impact that. So this is the part where everybody needs to get out your pencils and start taking notes, because it gets a little complicated here. It's important to note first that the congressional and legislative processes differ pretty dramatically. The congressional districts are drawn just like a bill that would pass through the General Assembly and be signed by the governor into law are. And so that's entirely different than what we will see through the legislative districts. So all of that is to say it's a more complicated process because there are first two puzzles, you know, the House and the Senate, and then those puzzles have a lot more pieces than the congressional map, 203 in the House and then 50 in the Senate. So all of this responsibility falls to 5 people that are members of, you've heard David refer to them, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, or the LRC. And so these people are a combination of elected and appointed officials, and we'll talk about how that comes about and what their process is. So required for maps. The LRC was created in 1968 at the State Constitutional Convention. And it is written in the Constitution that first district should be compact, contiguous, and equal in population as much as possible. And then that third bullet point there is really important because this is how Amanda won her case. Unless absolutely necessary, no county, city, borough, township, ward, division, etc., shall be divided, again, unless absolutely necessary. And so Amanda won her case because she was able to prove, because she drew her own maps, that the splits that were in the 2011 plans for both House and Senate had way too many splits, and she was able to do a much better job. And so that is something that needs to be considered moving forward. It's in the Constitution, it's in case law. So there's also a process that's written into the Constitution that's required for legislative maps. What's going to happen is the census data will be provided to the state, and we'll get to timing around that in just a sec. But the state will receive census data, it will prepare it for redistricting, and then once it's approved by the LRC, then the LRC has essentially 90 days to produce its preliminary or its draft mapping plan. During that time, in 2011, for example, there were hearings that were held, several hearings at different points around the Commonwealth to receive public feedback, but those hearings are not codified in the Constitution. It's not technically required. So one thing that draw the lines, and I'm sure fair districts as well will be pushing, is for a robust public hearing process during that 90-day period, even beforehand. We've had a lot of data come in through Draw the Lines, through the Redistricting Reform Commission, just people who have been paying attention to this process that want to share their opinion. So that'll be the time to do that. After they produce their plan, then the public will have 30 days to submit feedback. The LRC will then have 30 days to produce a final plan. And then the public will have 30 days to file any court challenges with the state Supreme Court. And so that's where Amanda's court challenge came in. So all that's to say, as background, the timeline for what we're going to see in 2021 is going to be pretty dramatically different than what we've seen in the past. So normally in 2011, for example, Pennsylvania received its block level redistricting data sometime in mid-March. And then they were able to begin mapping in late summer and produce the preliminary draft plan on October 30th. That is definitely not going to happen this go around. There was a bombshell that came from the US Census Bureau just last week that they are going to provide, they aim to provide the block level redistricting data by September 30th. And so instead of March, it's September. So this is what, 6-7 months later than normal. So that's going to push back all of the previously understood timing for this redistricting process. It's going to scramble the calendar a little bit. All this is going to kind of start to be understood next week at a State Government Committee joint hearing between the House and Senate to just gather info on the logistics of how Pennsylvania should handle that delay. And then after that, we'll all kind of turn our eyes towards the selection of who's going to serve on the LRC. And again, we'll talk about that in just a sec. But the opportunity exists to create an independent application process for that chairperson. And so when that's going to happen, we're not quite sure, but if we push things back several months, then that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at, late summer, early fall. There's some whispers that might happen earlier, but we don't know. There's really no way to know. And so all that will kind of back everything else up to when the maps are published, when there's public feedback, and when there's court challenges. So all these dates up here, I almost don't even want to say them or have them written because I'm going to look pretty dumb when this is pretty wrong, but it's very, very tentative. The LRC membership is important to note too. So in the Constitution, it's codified that the caucus leaders in both chambers, so Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Republican House, and Republican Senate leader, or their designees will serve as 4 of the 5 members of the LRC. It's worth noting that this is actually going to be the first time that a woman has served in the LRC, and there's 2, so steps forward. And it's also the first time that a person of color is going to be serving in the LRC. So special congratulations to Representative McClinton for that distinction. Now, so who that 5th member is going to be is a big question, and that's why we're pushing the petition today to really hone in on who that person can be to truly represent the interest of Pennsylvanians. There's opportunity for change here. Senator Costa is the only returning member from the 2011 process. So with that new blood that we'll see, maybe there's some interest in doing it a slightly different way than has been done in the past. Again, the Constitution really is very, very detailed in how this process should be done. It states that the 5th member needs to be a Pennsylvania citizen who doesn't hold elected office. So that leaves a lot of people who can do this. That person will serve as the chair, and so they automatically will be kind of the tie-breaking vote, so to speak, between the parties, theoretically. This is something that comes with a great amount of responsibility. The way that the chair is typically selected is the 4 members who are the caucus leaders will try to come together and find a consensus choice. But if they don't, then it gets kicked to the state Supreme Court. As you can see from that 3rd bullet, the court has chosen the chair pretty much every time. The LRC chose the chair once in '91, but then that person took a job with the H.W. Bush administration. And so then the court chose that one too. So in reality, the court has chosen the 5th person every time. And because Pennsylvania elects judges, that ends up being kind of an inherently partisan position. Whatever party controls the state Supreme Court, in 2011 it was Republicans, in 2021 it'll be Democrats. They get to have their say on who gets to be that tie-breaking vote on the LRC if there's any sort of partisan disagreement. In 2011, the LRC did accept public applications. They put out a request for applications and 13 people responded. But unfortunately, the eventual chair was not chosen by the LRC or by the court. They chose somebody outside that pool. So how robust of a process that was is kind of up for interpretation. But hopefully that'll be different this go around. So I'm going to throw it to David again for who the 5th member should be. Oh, David, we got you on mute still.
Thanks, Justin. I was going to say that graphic you had up there could very well be a mirror that says your picture here.
Right.
But instead we have Ben Franklin, so he's always our go-to guy. But there's nothing in the law that says that talks about the qualities of the 5th member. But what we're trying to encourage is that this is someone who's known and respected for their adherence to the law and their interest in transparency and fairness. You've obviously got to be able to insert yourself in a highly consequential political back and forth. Again, there's plenty of people that we now know that they're capable of drawing maps and balancing the constitutional and statutory requirements. and maybe first and foremost, that they're intent on putting the interests of our communities and our voters above the narrow partisan interests of our elected officials and political parties, which should leave us plenty to choose from. I saw that number 13, and I suspect that already in the petition that we posted earlier. And Justin, maybe you could drop that in the chat again. I saw somebody asking for that. We've probably already had more than 13 people raise their hands and say, yeah, sure, I could be considered for that. So that's really what we're trying to encourage, is that level of engagement and interest. And let me, Justin, flip the screen here, just to add a little more color and context to this. We've done some research looking at how the legislative redistricting process had played out in the last 50 years. And there's some pretty, I should say, maybe not quite amusing, because they're kind of head-spinningly comical, but there's some stories that come out of that. One group of stories we call the witness election program, where because of the way the districts have been manipulated, one or another incumbent elected official gets drawn out of his district. So Frank Pecor, they moved his district east. So what did he do? He rented an apartment in his new district to run again. The story of Fred Taylor and Larry Roberts is even more intriguing. Roberts moves to a series of undisclosed locations during the year, so the party couldn't identify where he lived and draw him out of the district. The kicker was he bought a house down the street from Taylor in the same precinct, figuring that if he's basically the next door neighbor of this guy, they couldn't draw him out of the district. So these are sort of the absurd lengths to which the process goes that serves no purpose other than petty partisan politics. It has nothing to do with the way we govern or the way these districts should represent the citizens who inhabit them. But there's more. They also can be used to punish people. Revenge is a district best served cold, as one of our folks said. You see some quotes from people who were literally drawn out of their district because they ran counter to their parties or to the leadership of their parties. Don't step out of line. Because if you do, you're going to get shafted. John Lawless, who some of you remember was a notoriously colorful representative, and he said, this is about paying the debts to the backroom boys. So these are beyond the data, beyond the bizarre shapes. This is the carnage, the comic carnage that gets foisted upon us here in Pennsylvania. Again, and can only serve, it's kind of mildly amusing, but it can only serve to sort of further corrode people's sense of this very important process. So this leads us back to, well, what do we do? And I will say it, I think for either the third or fourth time to sign the petition. Our goal is to say, let's find 1,001 Democrats, 1,001 Republicans, and 1,001 independents. I'll note the fastest growing segment of the electorate in Pennsylvania, and have all of those folks sign on to this petition that says, one, that the fifth member should be chosen by the four from the people of Pennsylvania. Let's not leave it to the court. Let's keep it out of the hands of the court. Let's make those four caucus leaders choose a Pennsylvania citizen. So that's a really important step. And the next thing is to say, there's a box in there that says, yeah, sure. If you ask me, I'd be happy to be considered. So sign one petition for two reasons. Second is we have, as I mentioned earlier, Draw the Lines as a current competition. That will be concluding in June 1st. Let the games begin. We've had a lot of just a great surge of energy when we've done this in the past, and so now's your chance. If we're successful, and if the four members of the caucus leaders are willing, we will have an ability to apply to serve as the fifth member. And it'd be great to see if we could get an applicant from all 67, each of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will be standing up the PA Voters Map Commission, which will give us a chance to kind of crystallize the great work that citizens from all over the Commonwealth have done. At this point, if everybody's here, I wanted to introduce what I hope is a really interesting conversation with two of our Citizen Map Corps members and former Governor Mark Schweiker, who has been a stalwart member of our Eastern Division Steering Committees, co-chaired that with Charmaine Matlock Turner, great civic leader from Philadelphia. And Governor Schweiker, as you know, started out in local government, but he served as Governor Ridge's lieutenant governor until Ridge was called to Washington to run Homeland Security. And then Mark stepped up and served the Commonwealth very ably as our governor. And he is a business person and a consultant now, but he's really been a great help to us in the Draw the Lines project. And he's going to have a conversation with two of our Map Corps members, Michael and Lauren. And I'm assuming that everybody's here. All present say aye.
Good to go, David.
Okay, Governor, the floor is yours, and I hope your fellow conversationalists are with you. Otherwise, It's a soliloquy.
Well, David, thank you, and to you and Justin and all of the folks who have kind of shown the way here over the last few years. Thanks for your insights and commentary over the last hour or so. I always find it not just insightful, but spiriting and encouraging. So let's stay at it. And as far as Lauren and Michael, I know we kind of use the term mappers. I just want you to know whether it's yourselves or the other 660 or so people that are with us live today, that we see you as more than just conventional mappers. You are truly influential designers of Pennsylvania's future in a civic and electoral participation sense. We need you for so many dynamic reasons. So I'm encouraged by the nature of the commentary that has just been shared. And look, it doesn't end here. We all know, hopefully everyone that's connected right now realizes that it's a tall order. Really, no one's gone this way before. I would say no one has reached this impressive position as far as opening up our democracy and guaranteeing that regular residents, regular voters who might be independents, not necessarily Republican or Democrats, feel encouraged and that they're going to be out there participating. And given the focus of DTL, or Draw the Lines, is the kinds of districts where residents and citizens feel a sense of connection in a geographic and spiritual sense to who might be their elected representative, whether in Washington as a member of Congress or as a state house member or a state senate member. So our work is truly just beginning. But I believe we've reached this far point. And then I know David and Justin, you've got some questions for both Michael and Lauren. That can I just say this respectfully? When I talked about the idea that we need you, we need your voice. We need your sense of dedication. We need your sense of the future. I don't have to tell anyone that's with us today how raucous the past year has been and how difficult and dispiriting January 6th was, because Americans are wondering about the caliber of our democracy and is it open to all. And here in Pennsylvania, we're not going to leave that to the conventional thinkers. We're going to leave it, so to speak, to the Laurens and the Michaels and the other hardworking mappers that have brought that civic-minded effort to our campaign. So I will say this to you: there are plenty of observers and commentators, not just in the fourth estate, in the media world, that are paying attention to what we do. and they want to hear from you. So your impact has already been felt. And as I sit here, and I'm thinking more than just what I'll call the political status quo types that they might be in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C., whether they're in good government organizations, to civic mission groups, to the media, they want to hear from you. They're looking for commentators with insight and experience. And really, it's not overstatement to say you're now expert. We can prove it. We've seen the caliber of your work as it relates to the design of the maps. So I want you to feel encouraged and distinguished. They want to hear your point of view. And we're going to make sure you're out there. And not just because you're younger, but because you're expert. But on the other hand, I'll finish with this. I do believe folks make the mental leap that because you're so engaged, that they really appreciate, as young people, you're giving yourself, giving your time and your effort. And they make the mental leap that you mean it, that you're sincere about this, and you can be objective because your future is at stake. That's an additional form of weight. I find that so impressive. And so when Justin and David talked about at least kicking off this segment as to why you're two extraordinary people and really personify the good in so many others that are with us, I just wanted to mention those things. So thank you, and thank you in advance for plenty that we're going to be doing over the next this really challenging timeline that we're going to live for the next 9 or 10 months. So with that, David, thank you for the opportunity just to welcome Lauren and Michael.
Thank you, Mark, and wonderful remarks. I think it's just set exactly the right tone for this conversation. I'm presuming that Michael and Lauren have heard all those wonderful things said about them, and Justin has a couple of questions. I think you've seen them beforehand, just to kind of give you a chance to add your thoughts to the mix. So Justin, fire at will.
Sure, and just really fast. Michael Scross is a undergrad student at Millersville University, and he was an honoree in our 2020 competition for his congressional districts. And then Lauren is native of Butler County and a recent grad at Pitt, and she was an honoree in our 2019 competition. And so thank you both for your continued involvement in the Map Corps and how you'll be involved. So when you drew your maps, we just, first off, what was the reason why you first started to draw a map? Can you, maybe we'll go to Lauren first and then to Michael. Why did you first open up drawthelinespa.org?
Yeah, so actually I was lucky enough to run into an event from Draw the Lines at Pitt. It was me and a couple of my classmates, and I got the whole rundown on gerrymandering, redistricting, and the process in Pennsylvania. And I had maybe given it some thought before, but once it was stuck right in front of me and someone said, have you ever really considered this? I started thinking about it, and I looked up my home district in Butler County, and I realized that it had never been entirely in just one district. And that struck me as odd right away. So whenever I got to draw my own map, that was kind of what I started looking at. I started looking at how much of one county, in other words, of people who share the same like mind, how can I fit those into the same district and best represent them? And when I looked at my districts, which I thought encapsulated that very idea, compared to the ones we've had in the past, I was struck by how different they were.
How about you, Michael?
How about you, Michael?
I was inspired because I did a constituent services internship with a state representative in my county. And I realized how hard it was to serve your constituents in a gerrymandered district, just in terms of you're representing so many school districts rather than 2 or 4, you're representing 5 or 6. It's hard to plan events and host town halls when everyone's spread out and there's no real sense of community because the lines are drawn purely for political reasons. So last summer, I actually decided to sign up to volunteer with Fair Districts. And when my county coordinator found out that I was a geography major, she pointed me in the direction of Draw the Lines. And I've been mapping ever since.
That's great. And so can you, and maybe this is a question for Governor Schweiker, can you, you started to touch on this a little bit in your opening remarks, but kind of give some, maybe some support to Lauren and Michael, and then pretty much everybody else on the line too, for why actually the process of drawing your map might inspire them to get involved further with this and to help move this process towards more independence and transparency.
Sure. My sense is we've reached a point in 2021, and again, after the raucous January and a raucous year, that, I don't think we always hear from the silent majority. And I think the silent majority, regardless of their registration, and you heard David Thornburgh's reference to how it's breaking out and this sense of independence is growing, I think Pennsylvanians want to be reassured that the process, the various governmental processes by how we elect our representatives, and particularly how we handle this mapping exercise, that they feel reassured and encouraged by it. And I think that to a great extent, Justin, the idea that regular folks, younger or older, not necessarily heavily partisan, can contribute to this. And I believe we're helping to channel that energy and that interest in stepping up, whether it's Lauren and Michael and countless other Pennsylvania men and women like that. So I think we're tapping right in to this, the preference and the will of the silent majority that we got to get this right. We love our country. We love Pennsylvania. We love the Commonwealth. I mean, think about it. Just as the name Commonwealth implies, Commonwealth, and the whole idea in William Penn's mind, as he started what was called in historical sense, the holy experiment, was we can count on regular people. And we will get this right. And it's all about the common man or the common woman, the common person. I think we're all concerned about whether or not we can live up to that high standard. And I think this is one channel, one project, one effort that's motivated by this. And so when regular, so to speak, non-ranking folks, again, young or old, are jumping into the process and don't feel stymied by it, aside from the good work we do as far as the maps and the designs and the illustrations and the affinity thing that drives us all relative to why we should have a good district, is that I think we're inspiring more. I mean, 2 years ago, we didn't think we'd reach these kinds of numbers relative to 625 people on this connection right now. The size of the Citizen Map Corps, the idea that we've got to kind of muster and welcome among media and journalists that we dare to say we're suggesting people step up to be the chair of the Legislative Commission. I think that's pretty cool. So to me, I think it's saying in spirited, nonpartisan fashion, we love our community and our Commonwealth so much. We're jumping into this, and we're coming, and we're probably going to get pretty strong too as the next 10 months unfold.
Well said, Mark. Let's put a wrap on this segment with one more question for Lauren and Michael, which I'm just interested in. I think a lot of folks are interested. What did you learn through this, the good, the bad, and the ugly? What did you learn through this mapping process that maybe inspires you to stick with it, to stay in there, to help encourage others to be a part of this effort? Start with you, Michael.
I think one thing I realized is how easy it is actually to map. The tools available to us now make it pretty simple for there to be so much transparency in this process. And as long as you can set objectives for your map, whether it be you want compact districts that don't split counties, or if you want, the results in each district to be reflective of the results in the state, you have the data to be able to do that and create really fair and really clean maps. So I think that was really nice to be able to actually actively participate and see how simple and transparent this process could be.
That's great. You put your finger on an important part of our message, which is that if you get folks like you and Lauren and the thousands of others together to think about what we're trying to produce through these maps, whether it's a greater sense of community or to make this a more governable district or to make sure that it's balanced in some ways. Once you get folks together to agree in that Mark mentioned William Penn in that kind of Quakerly sense of consensus, drawing the map is actually pretty straightforward because you have the operating instructions in front of you. So let me turn.
David, could I add this just very quickly?
Sure.
I think aside, we made the point about our independent, non-ranking, and expert folks stepping up. Let's not forget this. We've got over 100 people in the legislature in various ways who have said, opening up the process, strengthening our democracy, getting this right was a part of their platform. And I think when you kind of, in an electrifying sense, take our growing membership and ally with those kinds of thinkers, we got our best shot at refreshing the process than we've ever had.
That's right. Well said. Lauren, let's turn to you. What did you learn through this experience? Again, good, bad, the ugly, that it gives you confidence to hang in there and keep at it and to bring others along with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I realized how easy it is for citizen input in this process. Like I said, I had never really considered the process of redistricting before. I just kind of accepted that districts were something that were imposed upon Pennsylvanians. And that is not at all the case, as Amanda showed, back with her court challenge. This is something that citizens can have an input in and a very meaningful change in through organizations like Draw the Lines and Fair Districts. So I think finding out that, you can get involved and you can have a say by doing something as simple as drawing a map or even writing to a legislator, that was super inspiring to me to know that even I can make a district and a difference all in one go. So that's what really drew me to the process and continues to cause me to speak out about it.
Well, that's terrific because we are just at the end of the beginning of this season. So we're going to be counting on folks like Lauren and Michael and lots of other folks to sort of carry that message and to continue that energy that Governor Schweiker described. So thanks again to you, Mark, and to you, Lauren and Michael for adding your thoughts to the program, and lots of work ahead of us. But you've given us inspiration that we can do it. So now I'm gonna turn things over to Pat Beaty and Carol Kuniholm to give us an update on what we continue to hope could be a positive legislative development that would make all of our work a lot easier. And just in introducing Carol and Pat, just enormous credit for everything that you have created and produced and the impact that you've had. I was looking, I have on my shelf a book, some of you history types may have read this, probably the best book ever written about Pennsylvania politics by a guy named Paul Beers, written back in the 80s. And Paul notes that Pennsylvania has not always been known for its reform instinct. That might be a little bit of an understatement, but in my lifetime, I have never seen anything like the grassroots energy and commitment and persistence that the Fair Districts has created. So enormous credit to you. It's a marathon punctuated by sprints, as we like to say, and you guys have been in the race all along. So Carol and Pat, turn it over to you to give us an update on the legislative front and any other Fair Districts developments that you want to share with us.
Okay, thank you, David. As we just heard in your very excellent presentation by all of your panelists, Pennsylvania has not always lived up to the original vision of the bipartisan collaboration for the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. And, you know, with the wish and the desire of all of us that we would have maps that fairly reflect the makeup of our electorate. In the last redistricting, we ended up with some of the worst gerrymanders in the country as far as both our congressional and our legislative districts are concerned. And, you know, in this process, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission process, as in the legislative process generally, it's been a matter of the majority rules in the end. And, you know, the LRC majority in particular is not accountable to Pennsylvania voters, or has not been. And so we're hoping that as we go forward, they will be more so through your citizen mapping project and also the efforts of grassroots organizations like ours, that we will try to make them be more accountable in the next redistricting process. So, and Senator Costa said that there were important due process problems that needed to be addressed by that commission and also by future reapportionment commissions, including the failure to provide for a structure so that this commission could consider the very significant public testimony and written comments that we received. We all heard what was said, but this commission process does not involve and does not provide for any way by which we can reconcile those comments as it relates to the changes that need to be made. Had there been a process, we could have addressed very specific concerns that were raised by the public. So here we are 10 years later, about to embark on the same flawed process, but it doesn't have to be that way. And if you could move to the next slide, Carol. It doesn't have to be that way. Fair District Pennsylvania is supporting legislation that would provide that structure that Senator Costa talked about, and a way to make redistricting much more accountable to the voters. And it's called Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act, or LACRA. Bills will be introduced in this session very shortly by Representative Wendy Thomas with the bill number House Bill 22, and by Senator Lisa Boscola, which has been given the number Senate Bill 222. Those bills are not yet in print, but they will be the same as bills that were introduced in the last session. Some specifics about LACRA. It would do it by introducing much more transparency with multiple public hearings, and also by imposing specific and clear measurable map drawing criteria in place of the few vague standards that we have now, and by explicitly prohibiting partisan and racial gerrymandering. So LACRA would also require the Bipartisan Legislative Data Processing Center to create a user-friendly website for dissemination of data, for proposed maps and analyses, for public comments and other information free of charge to the public. The website must include a portal allowing any Pennsylvania resident to submit a map for consideration by the commission. It would also call for multiple statewide public hearings, both before and after the preliminary redistricting plans are approved. This is the key for the public to be able to present testimony on communities of interest. The final maps would have to be published on the website at least 7 days before they're voted upon. This gives the public and the mapping experts the opportunity to point out flaws before final vote. So I mentioned clear, measurable mapping criteria. The existing Pennsylvania constitutional requirements for compactness and contiguity and prohibiting division of political subdivisions unless absolutely necessary would apply to congressional as well as legislative redistricting. In addition, LACRA would provide enforceable limits on splitting counties beyond what is required by the population, and a prohibition against dividing voting precincts. We would have explicit prohibitions in the mapping process. Plans would not be allowed to divide voting precincts. LACRA also explicitly prohibits district plans that are designed to protect incumbents or to unfairly discriminate against political parties, including those express prohibitions against extreme partisan gerrymandering, will allow mapping experts and the Supreme Court to better evaluate the maps using standard measures of partisan fairness. Will also be what we call secondary criteria, which would be applied to the extent that they can be without violating any of the other criteria. And that would be to keep communities of interest intact, to be responsive to changes in voter preferences as measured by widely available tests, and to conform district boundaries to natural boundaries in the environment, like rivers and mountains, et cetera. So that's a pretty quick run through of the LACRA bill. There's a lot of detail in it. These slides will be available, and we have lots of information also on our website about the proposal. I want to finish the last couple of slides with a few words about timing. You heard before a reference to the fact that the Census Bureau has announced that the data needed to draw legislative districts and congressional districts will not be available until September 30th is the date that they mentioned, and that is 6 months later than normal. That delay is going to compress the timeline for redistricting before the next election cycle begins. So if the data don't arrive until September 30th, under the Constitution, the preliminary plan would be due within 90 days or no later than December 29th. And a final plan no later than February 27th of next year, which is after the first day to file nominating petitions. There's still plenty of time between now and September 30th for the legislature to enact the LACRA bills. And ideally that would be done by June 30th, so that there's time to implement them over the summer and get them ready to go for the fall. So, but regardless of whether or not LACRA passes by that deadline or any other, there's really no reason why the Legislative Reapportionment Commission cannot hold hearings in October, receive input from the public, and produce a preliminary plan by the middle of November. It doesn't have to take the 90 days that they have under the Constitution until the end of the year. They can certainly produce a preliminary plan, even with hearings and with consideration of public input and citizen maps, by the middle of November. And a final plan, I believe, really by the end of the year or early January at the latest. Keeping to that schedule would still allow time for any appeals to be filed, but it may be that the deadlines for circulating and for filing nominating petitions would have to be adjusted. I think that's likely to be the case. So even if LACRA is not enacted, there's still a lot that the Legislative Reapportionment Commission can do to make the redistricting process more transparent and more inclusive if they start now. And let's be very clear about one thing. The LRC can be as transparent or as secretive as they choose to be, even without any new legislation and despite the delay in receiving the census data. Step one really is to certify the 4 legislators who will serve on the LRC. We all know that those are going to be the 4 leaders of the General Assembly, the majority and minority leaders of the General Assembly. Senator Costa will be returning as a member, and the other 3 leaders. But the Constitution requires that they actually be certified, and the process really doesn't start officially until they are. And the rest of the events that are tied to that will flow in due course. So they should be certified as soon as possible. They can then instruct the Legislative Data Processing Center to begin to build a modern, robust, user-friendly website that will be ready to receive maps and comments from the public once the data is received from the Census Bureau. The leaders also need to move expeditiously to select a chairperson, even though it will not occur for a few months, several months, potentially, and hopefully with input from the effort that's being led by Draw the Lines to get citizens to apply. But they need to move as quickly as possible within those time constraints to get a chairman in place so that they can begin to operate really as a commission. The second reform in the list on the screen calls for an open and structured process, as Senator Costa proposed a decade ago. And I believe it will take a strong chairperson. Any citizen is eligible and can apply, and many will be well qualified. But I think it will take a strong chairperson who is willing and able to run the LRC as a commission that considers and debates points in public, rather than just having the 2 senators and the 2 House leaders negotiating separately behind the scenes. So even if LACRA is not enacted, it's likely that the maps will continue to be drawn to give one political party or another advantage. But nothing prevents the LRC from making all of their data available to the public, including all the partisan data. So that the public and experts and the courts can evaluate whether or not the final map unfairly discriminates against a political party's voters. That's all I have. And now I'll turn it over to Carol for some final words.
There. I am the chair of Fair Districts PA and also the vice president of government and social policy for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. I just wanted to note just a couple words to say, and then we do definitely want to have some Q&A. The League of Women Voters is part, and Fair Districts PA with them is part of People-Powered Fair Maps, was a national initiative to focus on redistricting, because this is a huge issue, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the entire country. But we do know that Pennsylvania has been historically one of the most gerrymandered, both for congressional districts until the League lawsuit of 2018, and also for our House and Senate districts continue to be among the most gerrymandered in the country. In Pennsylvania, the League has been advocating on this issue for at least the last 30 years without much success. But new technologies, which have made it easier for gerrymandering, have also made it easier for citizens to understand how maps are drawn, for citizens to draw maps themselves, as we've been hearing through the last hour and a half, and for citizens to compare and to analyze maps. And so that data makes it easier also for the LRC, if they choose, as Pat outlined, and as we've been talking, all of that new technology could make it possible to share data and to collect comments and proposed maps in an accessible, transparent way, and in a way that's timely, even given a compressed timeline. It is much easier, as we see right now, to hold and publicize public meetings across wide geographic distances than it has ever been. And that is an advantage that the LRC could use to make it possible to collect feedback and to do a fully transparent process. We know just last week, the Campaign Legal Center and the League of Women Voters released a report designing a transparent and ethical redistricting process, where they mapped out or laid out or described some of the best practices for redistricting. And many of those best practices have been incorporated into the LACRA bill that Pat described. We actually had input from the Campaign Legal Center, from the League of Women Voters legal team, and from many of our redistricting allies to construct LACRA, and also got input from legislators themselves. So that bill is, we think, best practice for states that are not able to have an independent redistricting commission, to put best practices in place for transparency and ethical redistricting. We know that the next 10 months will shape Pennsylvania maps and politics and policy for the 10 years beyond, and next 10 years and beyond. We have seen up really close what gerrymandered districts do to representation, to the inability for voters to be heard on important matters of policy. And we will be doing everything that we can to get LACRA passed, but also to ensure that the citizens are heard, no matter whether LACRA is passed or not, that there's a transparent process, and that we have some say. You will all be receiving follow-up emails from Draw the Lines and from Fair Districts PA in the next day or two. You'll be invited to regional mapping events so that you can look at maps for your own communities. You'll be invited to advocacy training so that you can help weigh in to get LACRA passed. You'll be invited to local actions to call attention to the importance of this redistricting cycle, and to make sure people are paying attention and insisting on fair maps. There are lots of times to sit back and let others do the work of government, and there are times when it's really important for citizens of all kinds to lean in and to learn all you can and to make your voice heard. And this is definitely one of those times. It's really important for all of us, no matter who we are, to be paying attention, to be thinking about the systems and structures of our government, and to be making our voices heard, to say we want a government that works for all of us. We want maps that represent all of us. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your interest. Thank you, Justin and David, for pulling this event together. And I believe Justin and David will be moderating the questions.
Yep.
Thanks.
We've got to end at right at 5:30, but thank you, Carol, and thank you, Pat, for again, your great work and your great and inspiring work. We've had an enormous number of questions in the chat, and thanks to Ann Hanna, who probably a number of you know is kind of a super mapper and super volunteer. She's been fielding a bunch of those. I think Justin's been fielding some of those, but Justin, are there some composite questions that you come across that you might throw into the mix and maybe direct them to whoever you think, or make them?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of people were curious about the potential for census delay with the data delaying the primary. And so David, if you got any thoughts on that, what that looks like for 2022?
Sure. I mean, I've talked to a reporter the other day. I think it's premature to make that judgment right now. I do know, though, that I'll just repeat what Pat Beaty said. This does give us plenty of time, particularly if the LRC members can be certified, to start the clock on the most robust cycle of citizen engagement on this issue that we've ever had. Anyone who knows, I said this earlier about our young mappers, the first order of business is to try to decide what you want to do and how you rank the priorities that you want to bring to the maps. And that's all work that we can do between now and September 30th, so that, when the data kind of hits the desk, as it were, drawing the maps could be a fairly straightforward exercise that takes, you've got the cycle that Pat described for the LRC to play out, but in my view, there should be plenty of time to, if we can front load the citizen engagement, to get the maps done and to meet the filing deadline, so that folks can decide, what to run for next cycle. But Pat, Carol, do you have a comment on that question?
Well, I would agree, and I think Carol would agree as well. I'll let her speak for herself. That it is premature to talk about whether or not the primary needs to be moved. As I tried to outline in my remarks, I think there's probably a pretty real likelihood that the deadlines to begin circulating nominating petitions and to file nominating petitions might have to be adjusted. But moving the primary, it might become necessary, but it's not a sure thing, I don't believe.
Justin, you have another composite question?
Yeah, sure. A few questions about communities of interest, whether it's demographics or, cultural or whatever. How has communities of interest been factored into mapping in Pennsylvania previously? Is this something that's codified or is it more of a value statement? So David, maybe.
I'll take that if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Historically, there's been no attention to communities of interest at all. I saw somebody mention school districts. My own school district is divided into 5 house districts, and my house district is divided among 4 school districts. So the comment that Michael made about being able to hold candidate forums or getting representation, it's really, really difficult. So communities of interest has never been in any way respected or acknowledged or incorporated into any of our mapping criteria. And even the mapping criteria that exists about not dividing townships or boroughs or wards, as we know, has been completely ignored. LACRA would say that you can't ignore that those requirements, but it also would put in place a communities of interest discussion, which would then allow for folks to say, here is a community and we want it to be respected, and offer that as input and have some conversation about that. That would be a big change.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add, and this was came out during the, whatever it was, 9 months that we ran the redistricting commission that the governor appointed. Pennsylvania, as many of you know, is what they call a little box state. In other words, we love local governments. Ballpark of 2,700 local governments, not including school districts or water districts or sewer authorities or mosquito control districts or what have you. And in a way, the fact that in theory, the Constitution protects the boundaries of those communities, many of which are quite small, the boroughs and townships and so forth. Actually, if you think of those as communities, then if we stuck to the letter of the Constitution, it actually protects those communities. Now, it doesn't include school districts. It does include wards within big cities. So think of those wards as kind of, community building blocks. But the other thing I'd say is, and we talked about this, I know with Carol and some other folks, it's a really beginning the conversation about what a district should look like by talking about what a community is and the assets of that community strikes me as a really powerful way to get started. And there's a new tool, I'm blanking on the name, that the Princeton Gerrymandering Project folks. Representable, yeah, which I would recommend to you. And so, when we talk about all the things that we can do, between now and the time the data comes out, encouraging those conversations makes a lot of sense to me.
David, we've got 1 minute left, and I want to save the hard one for you. So make the case to a partisan Democrat who is paying attention to the presentation, realize that the state Supreme Court's controlled by Ds. Make the case to a partisan Democrat why they should sign the petition that we've got out there. So, well,
look, if you're a partisan Democrat and that's why you're in this game, then Godspeed. But I think what we've seen is that when we approach this process with that in mind, you've seen what we end up with, and it's a process, and it's maps that disrespect communities, disrespect boundaries, disrespect the kinds of things that Mark Schweiker talked about, just the basic core of what it means to be a citizen in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'm not sure that's not why I'm here. All right. Looks like 5:30 on the dot. Thanks also to the Fair Districts folks for helping organize this and produce this really extraordinary turnout. And there were questions about how this recording is available. I guess it's residing on Facebook, right?
Yeah, I'll say a few logistical things. It was live streamed on Facebook, so it is on Facebook. It also was recorded on Zoom. It will be put on the Fair Districts PA YouTube channel by the end of tomorrow. Fair Districts PA will be sending a follow-up email to everybody who registered probably on Friday with a lot of follow-up. And I know Draw the Lines will also be sending a follow-up email to folks with some follow-up email information. But we'll be inviting you to some regional mapping events. We'll be inviting you to get involved in advocacy. We are certainly not going to step back from this conversation. This conversation is ongoing, and it will continue until we have good maps. And it's something that we all need to be participating in and paying attention to from now until we have those maps. So you will be getting a follow-up email, and it will have a link to a recording on YouTube.
Terrific. Well, thanks again. Thanks also to Justin, and everybody have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody.